Strings is a 2004 primarily Danish film, but was also co-produced in Sweden, Norway, and the United Kingdom. Not to be confused with the Strings film from 2018 or the Strings film from 2021. It was directed by Anders Ronau Klarlund, apologies for mispronunciation, and was produced by Bald Films. The film is probably one of the most unique I've ever reviewed on this channel, not just because of its method of puppetry, but with how the idea of stringed puppets themselves are also intertwined into the very world they live in, making for an incredibly creative take on the genre. A take that, as far as I'm aware of, has never been done in any other feature-length film. And though I'm aware there are other pieces of media which have utilised marionettes, such as Thunderbirds and Team America, this one seems to be the first that's trying to be as serious as possible, with dramatic action, emotion, and a lot of incredibly dark moments scattered throughout. And yes, there's even an intimate love scene partway through. It's a film where you can see a lot of effort went into the production value, even winning an award at the Robert Awards in 2006 for Best Children's Film? Huh, children's film? Really? Guys, just because they're puppets doesn't mean it's automatically made for children. I mean, what came second, Team America?
Terrorize this!
Yet, despite all this praise, it's a film which seemingly has little recognition online. I mean, I wasn't even aware of it myself, and it was actually Saberspark who recommended it to me. But even then, that was a good while ago, and for whatever reason I just never got quite round to watching it. So why now of all times? Well, I think it was after watching the expected yet still tragically disappointing Disney's Pinocchio that this film popped back into my mind. And boy, it was a relief to watch a film about marionettes that was actually, good. So let's fasten ourselves up as we dive in and take a look at the weird and wonderful tangled world of strings. But first, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, Keeps. Did you know that 2 out of 3 guys would experience hair loss by the time they're 35? Well, Keeps is a subscription service that helps men hold on to their hair, with clinically proven and research-backed treatments to stop hair loss and improve hair growth, with a plan that's personalized just for you and delivered straight to your door. Keeps has a network of expert medical advisors, prescribers, and care specialists to support you in making your hair goals a reality. Their treatment plan will also offer a year of 24/7 care and support, where you'll have unlimited messaging to connect with your prescribing doctor. All this for a price which is typically half the cost from a pharmacy. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/SteveReviews or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/SteveReviews. Thank you for listening, guys. Now back to the review. For something that I said had one of the most creative world settings, it sadly has one of the more generic plots. It starts off with the king, who commits suicide out of guilt from all the atrocities he's done in the past, mainly from the ongoing war with the enemy group, the Serifs. He leaves a note to his son, Hal, pleading with him to make peace with the Serifs and to be wary of his scheming brother, Nizo. Unfortunately, however, Nizo finds the note first and has it destroyed, which you'd think if the king was so aware of his brother's treachery, he would have gone to greater efforts to make sure that the note gets delivered. But, the plot needs to happen. Nizo then makes it appear that the king was instead murdered by the Serifs, and through some subtle manipulation, convinces Hal that he should go after the Serifs to avenge his father's death, with the plan to have Hal killed on the mission so that he can take the throne for himself. Whilst out on the mission, Hal gets captured by the Serifs, but soon learns that they're not the wicked and evil group of people that he was once led to believe, and even gets a new perspective of how his own family is seen amongst the kingdom. So yeah, like I say, pretty basic plot, basically Hamlet meets Avatar. But thankfully, the plot isn't the main draw to this film. The real draw is the world building itself. See, the film isn't simply a world story being told with the use of stringed puppets, but rather the world is built around the string puppets themselves. The puppets are fully aware of the strings being attached to them, but they have no idea where they come from, only assuming that it's from a mysterious higher power. Not only that, the strings are treated as the lifeline of the puppets. Literally, if a puppet head string is cut, they'll die. And the film wisely conveys this to the audience very early on, as we get the king's suicide in the opening scene. So yeah, in this world, saying that you want a relationship with no strings attached will mean something very different indeed. And even if one of the other strings are cut, the puppet will lose the use of that limb, and there is no way to repair or reattach the string. So what you have to do instead is remove another puppet's limb with a string attached, and then have that attached to you to regain the movement. And I like how this is done through a classless system, where the kingdom will have groups of slaves put on standby for just such an occasion. Early on in the film, where Hao is sparring, the string that controls his hand is cut, so they end up amputating a hand from one of the slaves and have it reattached to Hao, to which later on in the film, Hao is confronted by that very slave after he recognizes his own hand on him. The strings are even explained through the concept of birth, where instead of giving birth to a child, a couple will craft one out of wood. Then after a period of time, a set of new strings will form and detach from the mother's strings and will need to be quickly attached to the inanimate baby. It's so weird and bizarre, but also really awesome. Though it does make me raise a few questions, like why do you need to craft the body of a baby? Why not just craft an adult? Or what happens if you take those newly formed strings and attach it to a dead body? Would the body then come to life with its old memories intact and be like a half baby, half zombie type of thing? This is what keeps me up at night. And it's the little details to acknowledge the strings in this world that really show the care and attention put in by the filmmakers. Such as how it will be raining indoors because there can't be any ceilings present, how a prison is just a bunch of grid squares which will restrict the puppet's movements, when a gate closes it's just a single piece of metal that rises up from the ground, and even the war general, who because he's a much stronger character, has thicker strings which are harder to cut. I love that. Though this string concept isn't always perfect, as I do find it funny how we will have a character sneaking around, when all our other characters have to do to spot him is simply look up into the sky and see his strings.
Hey, I heard there's a lunar eclipse tonight. Maybe we should look up.
Nah, for me it's solar or nothing.
But it's not just the world building that makes this film so great, it's also the production value. The puppetry is done incredibly well, with a range of highly complex movements. Like in one scene, a puppet is literally on fire while still being operated. What the fuck? And what's cool is that during the opening credits, you do get a brief glimpse at all the complexities going on behind the scenes. Apparently Czech puppeteers all refused to work on the film when told how much the puppets had to do, which isn't really surprising, as puppetry is meant to be really hard work. Puppeteer Bernd Ogodnik claims that it takes up to 10 years just to perfect the movement of the hands, and that perfectly moving all the strings of the entire body can maybe be learned in 25 years.
It's taken 42 years, but I'm finally
a puppet master.
I remember the South Park creators talking about how unbelievably difficult they found it to make Team America, and thus said they would never do a sequel to it.
We quickly realized why not very many people make marionette movies, because it is excruciating to do. But it turned out really good, and we like how it turned out. But
we will never ever.
It almost
do
made
again.
it almost drove us back to working with actors.
But as much as I do love Team America, that was a film that was definitely taking a more goofy approach to the puppetry. Here though, they are really trying to make it feel as much of a live action epic as possible. And that came at a cost, with the film going over 7 million Danish kroner over budget, with one of the producers even having to sell his vintage car just to help cover the costs. I think that really just highlights the passion the team had for this project. We get some brilliant cinematography, with gorgeous looking shots throughout, a grand orchestral score, and some really talented voice acting.
You and I
are bound together.
And I think the vocal performances are crucial when it comes to a production like this, as the puppets don't really offer any facial expressions at all. I mean, even Team America would offer this to some extent. Here though, it's just the same static expression, so the vocals really need to portray the emotion our characters are feeling. Apparently the puppet designs were influenced from real world celebrities. Nizo was modelled after Sir Patrick Stewart, which, yeah, I see it. And Grak was modelled after Gary Oldman, which, to be fair, with Gary Oldman's various appearances, could pretty much look like anything. Because of the lack of expressions, the voices needed to sound distinguished, as with no moving mouths, it wouldn't always be obvious as to which character is speaking. Thankfully, I never really had an issue with this, and the camera shots are usually positioned to focus on the character that is speaking. Though there was one scene near the start I didn't quite think this was handled well, mainly because I hadn't become accustomed to each character's voice yet, and the camera angles don't make it obvious as to who is speaking. But other than that, it wasn't an issue. Now, having said all that praise, the film isn't perfect, and there are some notable flaws with it. I think first up, as I mentioned earlier, for a film that has such a creative world setting, it's a shame that the plot is just so generic. It's not terrible, the story is serviceable, the characters are fine, but it's just something that's been done a lot of times. I kinda wish the philosophy of the strings played more into the core plot. Maybe they come across a group of puppets that have learned to function without the need of strings, and this creates an existential crisis for what the strings really mean. Maybe the strings were once placed upon the puppets as a method of control, and now the puppets must free themselves? I don't know. I mean, they do kinda try to do something like this in the film, but it's so minor and only really has relevance for like one scene. I think another weakness is that the film does take itself a bit too seriously, as there's very little humour throughout, which for something that's an hour and a half in length, can make it a little bit of a slog in places. I'm not saying that it needed more slapstick or fart jokes or anything, but having a bit more humour in the dialogue, or maybe even a mild comic relief character, couldn't have hurt. I know I also praised the puppetry overall, but there are a few moments where the limitations of using puppetry does become apparent, such as some action scenes where it can look a bit goofy, and having the puppets vocalizing high levels of emotion while still sporting the same static facial expression. It almost makes it come across as unintentionally comical. And speaking of unintentionally comical, let's talk about that love scene. It's just weird. The film is trying to take the moment as seriously and as romantically as possible, but it just comes across as funny and awkward more than anything. Maybe they should have done a more string-based approach with this, something similar to the hair sex concept in Avatar, but now it's their strings intertwining instead. I don't know. What I do find funny is how this love scene is the most replayed part in the film's trailer. You horny bastards. In conclusion, I would say this is a film with an average story that is told in an interesting way. I think the visuals and the world setting will be the most captivating part of the film, so for people that are put off by the clear visibility of the strings, or can't get behind the use of marionettes, there's really not going to be much here for you. However, for those of you wanting to check out something that's visually unique, with a creative world setting, then this very well might be your kind of string. God, did I really say that?